Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. Did you know 97% of our viewers aren't subscribed? By subscribing, you'll be the first to see every new story we release. No more searching. Plus, it really supports the channel and allows us to keep creating the content you enjoy. If you value these stories, take a moment and subscribe below. Thanks. Okay, now to today's story. You know, life throws you curveballs. Real whoppers sometimes. You think you got things figured out and then, bam. Something comes along and just flips the whole table over. This ain't gonna be a pretty story, maybe not even one you'll like much, but it's the truth, or at least my truth, and I gotta get it off my chest. It started with the rent, like a lot of bad things do, I guess. The coffin fits had become my unwelcome roommate, always there, always making their presence known. They'd start in the dead of night, a tickle in my throat that would quickly escalate into a full-blown, body-shaking ordeal. Sometimes I'd cough so hard I'd feel like I was going to bring up a lung. And during the day, it was this constant, nagging hack that left me breathless and weak. My Brianna, she was a good kid, the best a mama could ask for, really. She was barely a woman herself, just turned 18, trying to juggle a job at the diner and take care of her old, ailing mama. It wasn't fair to her, not one bit. But she never complained, just kept on going, her little brow furrowed with worry. Our apartment, bless its heart, was small and cramped. The walls were thin, and we could hear the neighbors fighting half the time. The heating was temperamental, and in the winter it felt like the cold seeped right into your bones. But it was ours, you know. We'd made it our little nest, filled with hand-me-down furniture and pictures of Brianna growing up. Except the landlord, Justin, he was on our back something fierce about the rent. We were behind, no use lying about it. My sickness had put a real strain on our finances. I hadn't been able to work my cleaning job for months, and Brianna's tips at the diner barely covered the bills, let alone the rent. Every time there was a knock on the door, my heart would jump into my throat, thinking it was him. I remember, that morning like it was yesterday, the light sneaking through the gaps in the cheap blinds was weak and watery, painting everything in shades of gray. I was laying in bed, feeling particularly rotten that day, like all the energy had been sucked right out of me. My chest felt tight, and each breath was a struggle. I could hear the muffled sound of Brianna moving around in the tiny kitchen, probably making me some weak tea. Then, the knocking started. Sharp, insistent raps that echoed through the small apartment. The kind of knock that says, "I'm here, and I'm not going away." My stomach clenched. I just knew it was Justin. He'd probably come to finally give us the eviction notice. Where would we go? We didn't have any family nearby, no savings to speak of. The thought sent a shiver of fear down my spine, worse than any chill from the drafty windows. I heard Brianna's hesitant footsteps as she went to the door. Her voice, usually so bright, was quiet and nervous as she spoke to whoever was on the other side. I strained my ears, trying to make out the words. It was Justin, all right. I recognized his deep, slightly gruff voice. He was asking about the rent, his tone firm but not unkind. I could hear the worry in Brianna's voice as she tried to explain our situation, about my illness, about how we were trying our best to catch up. She sounded so small and vulnerable, and it broke my heart that she had to carry this burden. Then the door opened wider, and there he was, standing in our cramped living room. Justin. He was a big man, always dressed in these plain, practical clothes. His face usually held this serious expression, like he was always thinking about something important. He looked around the small space, his eyes sweeping over the worn-out furniture and the stacks of unpaid bills on the coffee table. He started talking to Brianna again, his voice still all business, reiterating the amount we owed. I could see the tears welling up in Brianna's eyes, and I wanted to call out to her, to tell her it would be okay, but my voice felt trapped in my chest. Heard her say, her voice barely above a whisper, "My mama, she's real bad, Mr. Justin. We're gonna try and get the money together, honest we are. We just need a little more time." Brianna, meanwhile, seemed to be blossoming in this new environment. She started spending a lot more time downstairs with Justin. She'd offer to help him in the garden, tending to his roses, or helping him with the vegetables he was growing. In the evenings, I'd often hear their laughter drifting up the stairs as they watched TV together in the living room. They seemed to get along remarkably well. At first, I was genuinely happy for her. It was good for Brianna to have someone else to talk to, someone her own age-ish, besides just her sick old mama. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to notice subtle shifts in their dynamic. The way Brianna's eyes would light up when Justin entered the room. The way she'd laugh at his jokes, even the ones that weren't particularly funny. And Justin. I'd catch him looking at her sometimes, a soft, almost tender look in his eyes that made my stomach do a little flip-flop of unease. They started talking about things I didn't understand, movies I'd never heard of, music that was completely foreign to me. It felt like they were slowly building this little world between them, a world where I was just an observer, watching, from the sidelines. A gnawing feeling started to take root in my chest, a tangled mess of jealousy and this deep, scary fear of losing Brianna. She was my daughter, my best friend, the only family I really had. We'd been a team for so long, just the two of us against the world. What if this new arrangement changed things? What if she started to prefer being downstairs with Justin to being upstairs with her sick mama? What if she didn't need me anymore? The thought sent a cold wave of panic through me. I tried to broach the subject with Brianna a few times, but I didn't quite know how to articulate my worries. I didn't want to sound like some overprotective, jealous old woman. So I'd just ask her how her day was, and she'd enthusiastically tell me about helping Justin fix a leaky sprinkler or planting some new herbs in the garden. She seemed so genuinely happy, so carefree and full of life. And that, ironically, made me feel even worse. It was like I was the one with the problem, the one being negative and suspicious, the one potentially standing in the way of her happiness. One particularly sunny afternoon, I was sitting by my bedroom window, looking out at the backyard. I could see Brianna and Justin down in the garden. Brianna was laughing, her head thrown back, her bright hair catching the sunlight, and Justin was looking at her with this undeniably tender expression on his face. It hit me then, like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a friendly landlord-tenant relationship anymore. Something was definitely growing between them. And I felt utterly helpless, like I was watching my daughter slip away, and there wasn't a darn thing I could do to stop it. My heart ached with a loneliness that went deeper than just being physically ill. It was a sick feeling in my soul, a premonition of a future where I might be left alone. The atmosphere in Justin's house had definitely shifted. There was this undercurrent of something unspoken, a kind of quiet energy that hummed beneath the surface of our daily interactions. Brianna was still her sweet and attentive self with me, always bringing me my morning tea and asking if I needed anything. But there was a new kind of lightness about her, a giddiness that I hadn't witnessed before. Her eyes sparkled a little brighter, and she seemed to hum little tunes to herself as she moved around the house. And Justin? He was still polite and considerate towards me, always making sure I was comfortable. But his attention, his focus, was undeniably drawn to Brianna now. I'd catch them exchanging glances across the dinner table, little smiles, that held a secret language I wasn't privy to. One evening, Brianna came into my room. She was unusually quiet, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt and avoiding my gaze. She kept looking down at the floor, like she was trying to find the right words etched in the carpet. I could tell something significant was on her mind, something she was struggling to articulate. My heart sank a little further with each passing moment. I had a pretty strong suspicion about what she wanted to talk about, and the thought of it made my stomach clench with a mixture of dread and resignation. She finally sat down on the edge of my bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She took a deep breath, like she was preparing for a difficult plunge. "Mama," she started, her voice barely a whisper, laced with a nervousness I hadn't heard in a long time. "Can I talk to you about something?" I managed a weak nod, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm in my chest. Here it comes, I thought. The confirmation of my fears, the words that would solidify the unsettling shift I'd been sensing. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and filled with a complex mix of nervousness, hope, and something that looked undeniably like love. "Mama, it's about Justin." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and charged. It wasn't exactly a shock. I'd seen it coming for weeks, but hearing her say it out loud, acknowledging the truth of it, still felt like a sharp blow, a confirmation of the change that was happening. I didn't know how to react, what to say. Part of me, the fiercely protective mother in me, wanted to lash out, to tell her it was wrong, that he was too old for her, that it was just gratitude or infatuation or some other fleeting emotion that she'd eventually outgrow. But another part of me, the part that had witnessed their connection, that had seen the genuine happiness in her eyes, hesitated. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts and keep my voice steady. "Brianna," I said, choosing my words carefully. "You know he's a lot older than you, honey." I wanted to point out the obvious, the societal expectations, the potential for heartbreak. She nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I know, Mama. I know how it looks. But it's not just about that. He's kind, and he listens to me, really listens, in a way that, well, you know." Her voice trailed off, and I knew what she meant. I'd always been busy, focused on providing for us, and maybe I hadn't always been the best listener. "And he makes me laugh," she added, a small, hesitant smile gracing her lips. I thought about Justin's sometimes corny jokes and the way Brianna would giggle. At them, her laughter bright and genuine. I had to admit there was a certain warmth in their interactions. "And," she continued, her cheeks flushing a delicate pink, I think he might feel the same way about me." That was the part that truly twisted the knife. The thought of Justin, this man who had essentially taken us in out of pity, looking at my daughter with romantic feelings. It felt inherently wrong, a violation of some unspoken boundary. But then I couldn't ignore the memory of that soft, tender look I'd seen in his eyes in the garden, the way he'd watched her as she laughed. Maybe it wasn't just my overactive imagination. I still didn't know what to say. I was caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. My protective instincts were screaming, urging me to put a stop to this before it went any further. This was my little girl, and I didn't want to see her heartbroken or taken advantage of. But I also couldn't deny the genuine happiness I'd seen in her face lately, and I didn't want to be the one to crush that. It's complicated, honey," I finally managed to say, my voice a little shaky. "There's a big age difference, and I just worry about you. I don't want you to get hurt." She reached out and took my hand, her small fingers squeezing, mine reassuringly. "I know, Mama," she said, her eyes earnest. "But I'm not a little kid anymore. And Justin, he's not like that. He respects me. He respects you." I desperately wanted to believe her. I really did. But it was hard to shake the feeling that we were venturing into uncharted territory, a situation with potentially painful consequences. It felt like the very foundation of our little family was shifting, rearranging itself in a way I hadn't anticipated and wasn't entirely sure I was comfortable with. My daughter was falling in love with our landlord, the man who had offered us a roof over our heads out of the goodness of his heart. It was all so tangled up, so messy. "Just be careful, okay?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper, betraying the turmoil inside me. "Just promise me you'll be careful." She squeezed my hand again, her gaze steady and sincere. "I promise, Mama. I will." After she left my room, I lay there in bed, staring up at the ceiling. The shadows danced in the dim light, and my mind raced with a million unanswered questions and unspoken fears. What was happening to us? This wasn't the life I had envisioned for Brianna or for myself. I was supposed to be the one looking after her, guiding her through life, not the other way around. And now it felt like she was growing up and away from me at an alarming speed, her heart leading her down a path I wasn't sure I understood or approved of. I felt a profound sense of helplessness, a feeling that the control I once had over our lives was slowly slipping away. The days that followed Brianna's confession were filled with a palpable awkwardness. It was like there was an invisible wall between the three of us, built from unspoken feelings and hesitant glances. I tried my best not to dwell on it, tried not to analyze every interaction between Brianna and Justin, but it was a constant, low-level hum of anxiety in the back of my mind. I'd catch them sharing a knowing smile across the dinner table, or see Brianna's hand linger a little too long on Justin's arm, and my stomach would clench with a familiar mix of worry and a strange kind of resignation. One afternoon, Justin knocked softly on my door and then actually came into my room. He usually just stuck his head in and asked if I needed anything from the doorway, so his full entry felt significant, like he had something important to say. He pulled up the chair beside my bed and sat down, looking a little uncomfortable himself, his usual confident demeanor slightly subdued. "Michelle," he began, his voice quiet and thoughtful. "Brianna told me she talked to you." I nodded slowly, avoiding his direct gaze. I busied myself with smoothing out the wrinkles in my blanket, a nervous habit I had. He let out a soft sigh. "Look, I know this probably seems strange. Maybe even wrong." He finally met my eyes, and I saw a flicker of genuine concern in them. I finally looked back at him, my expression neutral, trying not to betray the turmoil inside. "It's unexpected, Justin, to say the least." It felt like a massive understatement. He nodded again, his gaze steady. "I understand that, and I want you to know, I never intended for anything like this to happen. When I offered you and Brianna to come stay here, it was because I saw you were sick and needed help. That was it. There were no other motives." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "I swear, Michelle, my intentions were purely to help you get back on your feet." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did. The logical part of me knew that he hadn't orchestrated this situation. But another, more cynical part of me remembered that loneliness I'd glimpsed in his eyes, the quiet sadness that seemed to linger around him. Maybe he had subconsciously been looking for companionship, for someone to fill the void left by his late wife, and Brianna, with her youth and vibrancy, might have seemed like an unexpected answer to that unspoken need. "Brianna is a good kid. Justin," I said, my voice firm, trying to convey the depth of my protectiveness. "She's my whole world. I just don't want to see her get hurt." The words felt inadequate, barely scratching the surface of my anxieties. "I know that." "Michelle," he said, his eyes earnest and sincere, "and I would never do anything to hurt her. Or you. I have a lot of respect for both of you." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "Honestly, Michelle, this whole thing has taken me by surprise too. I never expected to feel this way about Brianna." He went on to explain how he'd gradually started to develop feelings for her, how her kindness and her infectious optimism had drawn him in. He talked about her spirit, her enthusiasm for life, the way she made him feel lighter and more hopeful than he had in years. It all sounded genuine, heartfelt. But still, the significant age difference loomed large in my mind, a constant, nagging worry. "Justin," I said, my voice softer now, tinged with concern. "She's barely out of school. You've lived a whole life already. There's so much she hasn't experienced yet." "I know," he said, his gaze thoughtful. "And that's something I've thought about a lot, Michelle. Believe me. But it's not just about age, you know? It's about connection. It's about how we make each other feel, the way we understand each other." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I know I'm older, and I know there are challenges that come with that. But my feelings for Brianna are real, and I would never take them lightly." He then started to talk about his past, about his wife who had passed away a few years ago after a long illness, about the profound loneliness he'd felt since then. He said that Brianna had brought a light back into his life that he thought had been extinguished forever. He spoke with a vulnerability that surprised me, a raw honesty that made it harder to dismiss his feelings. Justin also made a point of reassuring me about my own place in this evolving dynamic. He said he cared about me deeply, that he wanted to make sure I was comfortable and well taken care of. He even used the word family, saying that he saw us as a family in a way, an unconventional one perhaps, but a family nonetheless. It was all so unexpected, so far from the life I had always known. Over the next few weeks, I found myself observing them more closely, trying to understand the nature of their connection. I watched the way they interacted, the easy laughter that flowed between them, the gentle touches, the way their eyes would meet across the room. And slowly, almost reluctantly, I started to see what they saw in each other. It wasn't just some fleeting infatuation or a rebound situation. There seemed to be a genuine, deep affection between them. And Justin, despite the age gap, treated Brianna with a remarkable amount of respect and kindness. He wasn't some predatory older man trying to take advantage of a naive young girl. He seemed genuinely to care for her well-being and happiness. Gradually, I started to relax my guard a little. The underlying fear didn't completely vanish, but it definitely lessened. I began to entertain the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this could actually work. Maybe love didn't always adhere to the neat little boxes and societal expectations that I had always believed in. Maybe there was room for happiness in this unconventional arrangement. Life in Justin's big house eventually settled into a new, albeit slightly surreal, kind of normal. Brianna and Justin were, for all intents and purposes, a couple. It still felt a little strange to acknowledge it, to say the words out loud, but it was the undeniable truth. And surprisingly, they seemed genuinely happy together. Seeing their happiness, the way they looked at each other with such affection, it slowly began to ease my own anxieties and bring a measure of contentment to my days. I even started spending more time downstairs with them. Justin's corny jokes, which had initially elicited polite smiles, now often drew genuine laughter from me, especially when Brianna would playfully roll her eyes and then giggle along. We'd gather in the living room in the evenings to watch movies, a comfortable silence settling over us in between the dialogue and the action on the screen. Sometimes Justin would even take over the kitchen, whipping up surprisingly delicious meals for the three of us. He had a knack for comfort. Food, the kind that warmed you from the inside out. We had somehow morphed into this little, unconventional family unit. Me, Brianna, and Justin. It wasn't the traditional family structure I had always envisioned for myself or for my daughter, but it was a family nonetheless, bound by a strange mix of circumstance, affection, and a surprising amount of love. Over time, my perception of Justin shifted dramatically. He wasn't just the stern, somewhat distant landlord anymore. He had become a kind, generous man who had not only opened his home to us in a time of need, but had also opened his heart to my daughter. He loved Brianna, and he showed it in countless small ways every day. And he genuinely cared about my well-being, always making sure I was comfortable and had everything I needed. And for me, that was enough. More than enough, actually. Brianna was still my girl, my rock, the center of my world. But now she had Justin too. Someone to share her joys and sorrows with. Someone to build a future with. And he wasn't trying to replace me in her life. He was simply adding another layer of love and support. In a way, he was adding to my life as well, providing a sense of stability and companionship that I hadn't realized I was missing. Of course, we still had our moments. There were times when the age difference between Brianna and Justin would flicker in my mind, a nagging worry about the future and what other people might think. But then I would look at Brianna's radiant smile, or witness the gentle, loving way Justin looked at her, and I would be reassured. What they had was real, and that was all that truly mattered. One particularly peaceful evening, we were all sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. Brianna was nestled comfortably against Justin, her head resting on his shoulder, her hand intertwined with his. I was sitting in the old rocking chair, gently swaying back and forth, feeling the warm breeze on my face. A comfortable silence settled over us, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant sound of traffic. "You know," I said softly, breaking the quiet, "I never in a million years thought my life would turn out like this." Brianna looked over at me, her eyes sparkling in the fading light, and offered me a warm smile. It's a good kind of different, though, right, Mama? I nodded, a genuine smile spreading across my own face. Yeah, honey, it is. Justin reached over and gently took my hand in his touch surprisingly comforting. We're glad you're here with us, Michelle. And in that moment, sitting there on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew it was true. We had found our own unique version of happiness, our own unconventional little family, in the most unexpected of circumstances. Love, it turns out, doesn't always follow the predictable paths we imagine for ourselves. Sometimes it takes unexpected detours, and sometimes it leads us to places we never thought we'd go. But if we're open to it, if we allow it to blossom, in its own way, it can create something truly beautiful, something real and lasting. And that's exactly what happened to us. We stumbled upon our own version of a happy ending, even if it wasn't the one I ever would have written for myself. And you know what? I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.